The New York Knicks have officially found their guy, David Fizdale, former Memphis Grizzlies head coach, Miami assistant. He is joining the New York Knicks on a 4-year deal to become their new head coach. And as Kendall just said a couple of seconds ago, there has been a lot of excitement around this hiring. I said it many times. For me, he was my number one option. I liked the idea of Black. I liked the idea of Budenholzer. But to me, I thought that Fizdale was checked off the most boxes for me and what I wanted in the Knicks head coach. When I look at David Fizdale, I'll get a guy who's self-made. No, not a guy who was handed anything. This guy started from the bottom rung when it came to NBA head coaching, and he worked his way all the way up to the top. So hard worker, self-made, very well liked by 99% of the players he's been in contact with. The only guy I've ever seen say anything bad about him was Marc Gasol, and I guess we'll talk a little bit about what that could mean with his relationship with Kristaps Porzingis. But liked by all of the players he's played for, but in the most important guys being LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, guys you have to respect in terms of their opinions about coaches and how the game should be played. These guys talk very highly about David Fizdale. Also, excellent defensive coach. The Miami Heat defense and the Grizzly defenses always were top notch. It's always the first thing he focuses on. The Knicks have been a terrible defensive team for pretty much since Jeff Van Gundy left. And speaking of Jeff Van Gundy, Kendall, I feel like with this hire, a lot of Knicks fans and Knicks media people have been yelling about how Knicks need to bring back Jeff Van Gundy, and I've never really jumped onto that bandwagon. I feel like Jeff did a good job when he was here, but at the same time, he did quit on the team. He did have his limitations as an offensive coach, so he never was that exciting for me in terms of a return to being a Knicks head coach. But what I will say is, if you like the idea of Jeff Van Gundy as a Knicks head coach, then you should love the hiring of David Fizdale, because Fizdale has many of the same traits that Jeff Van Gundy did when he took over the Knicks job back in the late '90s. This Riley disciple, again, self-made head coach, was an intern in the NBA before he got into coaching. Very good communicator, fights for his players. All the things that you enjoyed about Jeff Van Gundy, Fizdale encompasses all those same traits. So for me, Kendall, I think that this was a great hire for the New York Knicks. I think if you're a Knicks fan, you should be very excited about this hire. And I'm curious to see where they're going to go now in terms of how they shape this roster with Fizdale as the lead guy.
Yeah. This hire, it's interesting because there's no obvious tie that I could see, that I could find with David Fizdale and the Knicks front office, the Knicks players, or anything of that nature. And that may be a good thing. This was not a hire, because there were plenty of guys in this race that did have ties to either the organization, the front office, or just the city of New York, or the players of the roster.
Right.
Whether it be Budenholzer, who has ties to Tim Hardaway, Mark Jackson, obviously he's a New Yorker, and then there was the whole thing of apparently what's the guy's name, Rich Kleiman, who's close with KD. It was also close with Mark Jackson. It's also close with Steve Mills. So that was also kind of a thing that was going on. And then you also had Kenny Smith, whose name was in the running, Mike Woodson, plenty of guys with ties to New York that were in the running. Fizdale was kind of the only outsider, and David Blatt was the other guy. Fizdale was kind of the only outsider in this equation, and so for him to get the job suggests that he was the most impressive candidate out of all these guys.
Right.
And so that's got to be exciting if you're a Knicks fan. Like you said, from looking on the outside and not considering all those ties, he seemed like the most complete candidate. And like you mentioned, DJ, he checked all the boxes that you would, or at least the most boxes for what you would have hoped for from this next head coach. The one thing that interests me is Mark Berman, obviously from the New York Post, said that they're now going to be making a run at LeBron James in the offseason. I don't know how realistic of a expectation that is, or how realistic of a goal that is to hopefully try and get LeBron James. But And it doesn't sound as if they hired Fizdale trying to get LeBron.
Right.
It seemed as though, but it does seem as though they're hiring Fizdale, and now they feel like this may give them a chance at getting LeBron. So why not try? So I mean, I think this is an interesting hire. You mentioned DJ, the relationship with Kristaps Porzingis is going to be important. Fizdale is going to meet with Porzingis in Latvia, so they'll have to hit the ground running. But I think this is an interesting hire. There aren't too many negatives to even point when it comes to Fizdale. I guess the only negative would be that he's sort of an outsider, and that some of those other guys would have a better familiarity with the organization than Fizdale. But that shouldn't be the goal, because I mean Brad Stevens had no ties to the Boston Celtics when we hired him, but he's obviously right now looking like the best coach in the NBA. So that's not the number one thing. This isn't a who can hire their buddy type of deal. So I like this hire for the Knicks, and you should also feel good that the Phoenix Suns went out and offered him their head coaching job before the Knicks did, and he turned it down. So he was not. This isn't like they had to reach very far to get this guy. This is a coveted hire.
And the Suns also interviewed a lot of people before deciding to try to offer Fizdale the job, and him turning that down. A lot of things to touch on there, starting with LeBron James. Look, I don't think LeBron James is ever going to be a New York Knick. I definitely don't think it's going to happen next year. When he's expected to be, he's going to be a free agent this year. I don't think that it's a big deal that the Knicks want to clear cap space in order to try to talk to him and make it a realistic possibility in terms of a money financial standpoint, because the team is in a situation where they're not going to compete for the playoffs next year without a LeBron James, something like that. Like, there's no way, there's no path to the Knicks. There's no path to the Knicks competing next year. So if their idea was let's clear the books a year early as opposed to just 2019 and just kind of letting this year just be like a whatever year, I don't mind that as much. It's not really that big a deal. The only caveat I would have is you cannot clear the books for LeBron James by giving up first-round picks or Frank Ntilikina to do that. That cannot be an option. Unless LeBron James or Maverick Carter or Rich Paul has found Fizdale and Mills and talked to him in a closed room and said, you know what, LeBron's coming here as long as you guys hire Fizdale. That cannot be part of the equation when it comes to the Knicks trying to see what they're going to do this offseason. If I was the Knicks, my plan would still be just to kind of let this year play out for 2019. But if they could find a way to get Courtney Lee off the books, and if Cantor and O'Quinn want to opt out, and they decide, you know what, that's fine. We need a high draft pick anyway. So while those three guys were contributors for the Knicks would be a worse team without those guys, assuming you bring back guys with minimum salaries or you replace them with rookies, there's going to be probably a drop-off unless the Knicks draft a dynamo this year. That's okay even if that means you didn't get LeBron James, as long as you don't blow that cap space for next season. But you can't say, oh, let's give up Frank Ntilikina, let's give up next year's first-round pick just so we can have a chance, what seems like an impossible minimal chance at LeBron James. That can't happen. I don't think Knicks are that stupid enough to do that. No disrespect to Mark Berman. When I read the article, I did feel like it was a little bit of
speculation.
I don't want to say clickbait, but yeah, it did feel like speculation, kind of like trying to connect dots that are kind of there, but like you're gonna need a really big damn big coloring book to connect the dots. Like it's not like it's a small book. Like it's a book that's probably 15 feet long to connect the dots that the Knicks could have a shot at LeBron based on what's happened. But he says this is the plan. So if that is the plan, that's fine. But you can't do anything involving mortgage in your future without a guarantee from LeBron, which I would almost certainly guarantee they don't have.
My other question would be, I'm not going to ask what's your interest level in LeBron James, because obviously you're interested in having LeBron James.
Did you watch him last night?
Yeah, exactly.
I'd be perfectly fine with LeBron being on my team.
But the question would be, what type of control. Let's just say LeBron does have an interest in coming to New York.
Mm-hmm.
What, as an organization, should the Knicks be willing to do to get LeBron? Like, let's say LeBron says, "Look, I can't come to a team with an injured young player.
Right.
You're gonna have to find a way to move him to get one of my boys, whether it be John Wall or somebody, or move him to get, I don't know, Kawhi Leonard. Obviously, Kawhi Leonard would be nice, but would you have to? What if LeBron said, "Look, I mean, Frank's a nice player, but I need a ready-made piece for the team to be a contender." What are you willing to do to get LeBron, right, knowing he's, what is he, 32 years old, 33 years
33. Old? I mean, Frank is expendable. If you're talking about LeBron James, there's no conversation.
Right.
He wants Frank off the team. I will give Frank to. I will pay for his plane ticket wherever next city he goes. And I love, me, I like Frank Ntilikina as a young prospect, but he has to go if LeBron says he has to go. Porzingis is the interesting question because that's something that I did think about. My thing is LeBron, when it comes to what he's decided to do in the offseason, in his last two decisions, it's always been a package deal with some other guy. He's never looked at a team and said, they're fine as they are, and I'll just join that team. He's always trying to put together the pieces that he feels like he can compete for a championship. So with Porzingis, it would be interesting. It would depend on the player, honestly. It wouldn't just be any player, but if he's talking about, you said a John Wall or Kawhi Leonard,
Paul George.
I mean, I wouldn't love the idea because I don't know how I love. Like, I don't know if I love. People keep trying to make this LeBron and Kawhi pairing like a thing. I don't know how. I don't know if I like that pairing personally, but that's another thing. I'm not sure I love the Paul George pairing. I don't know if I like. LeBron hasn't played with like another small forward type like
basketball.
That
what I'll say is that, and the Celtics are showing this, that basketball has become a more positionless sport.
That's true.
And the small forward position is particularly the most versatile position you can play, in theory. So having a bunch of small forwards like Boston does, or like we've seen with Team USA at times, and LeBron's a guy who can play all five positions anyway. So you might be able to get away with that. That's the awkwardness of having LeBron and Paul George, or LeBron and Kawhi, or Kawhi and Paul George, or whatever trio you want to make up. But because Paul George can probably play some 2, could probably play some 4 at times, LeBron could play some 4, could play the point, Kawhi could play 2 through 4. Those guys do have some versatility in terms of their positions. And
that would be something that Fizdale would have to, talk to the coaching staff and the front office about how he would make that work. He made LeBron and Wade work, and a lot of people. There were some people I really didn't think there would be an issue, but there were some people who didn't think that could work. So yeah, I mean, I think that if LeBron is talking about getting rid of anybody, at the very least, you have to strongly consider getting rid of whoever he's talking about. If it's anybody besides Porzingis, just get rid of them. There's no conversation. If it's Porzingis, you gotta think about it and talk about it and what player you're pairing with him. I tend to think that a player like Porzingis would be perfect for LeBron James, but if he's worried about the injury, not sure how he's gonna come back, that's a totally understandable thing. When you think about the ACL, guys have come back strong, but some guys haven't, like Derrick Rose. So it's kind of a wait and see situation with that. So I get it, but I'll tell you what, getting back to the whole Fizdale thing, it's going to be fascinating to see how he cultivates that relationship with Kristaps Porzingis, because assuming this LeBron thing isn't happening, which I think is a fair assumption still,
yep,
his relationship with the star player is going to be the most important thing. And the last time he was the head coach of a team, he couldn't get along with the best guy on the team, and it ended up costing him his job. Marc Gasol was not a guy who I ever envisioned being particularly selfish or a problem for other coaches. So, and then Fizdale was so beloved by so many of his players, including guys on the Grizzlies. It was bizarre to see how that fell out. I don't know how to justify or kind of get with how I should feel about how that went down. But that's going to be the thing to talk about, because Porzingis, his first year with Hornacek didn't go very well. He had his issues with the front office, as we saw last year. He could be moody. That's going to be a very important relationship, especially for someone who's so young. And Fizdale is going to be the guy who's really going to be. He could potentially be the guy that's going to be the coach that's formulating Kristaps' most formative years. You know, the player that Kristaps becomes is going to be under Fizdale, unless Fizdale's gone in a year or anything like that. But barring some, like, doomsday scenario where Kristaps not on the team or Fizdale's gone in a year or two, these formative years, the making of Kristaps Porzingis is going to be under David Fizdale. So he has to make sure, and Kristaps has to make sure that relationship gets off on a good note. And I know people pointing to the Euro thing. I don't know if that's a thing I should be concerned about in terms of Kristaps being European and Gasol, but there's no doubt that Fizdale has to be able to get on the same page with his star players. This is a players' league right now.
Yeah. I mean, it's a concern. I mean, it's a concern from both sides because Porzingis obviously had his issues with Phil Jackson, and so he'll have to be willing to accept coaching. Phil Jackson was obviously a quirky personality, so I wouldn't suggest that this would happen again. And Fizdale had his problems, obviously, you mentioned with Marc Gasol. So in either situation, I looked at it and I said Fizdale's a knucklehead or Porzingis is a knucklehead. Those kind of seemed like isolated incidents for both guys. Like Mark Jackson seemed like more of a trend type of thing.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't one incident. It wasn't one isolated incident with Mark Jackson that suggested that he may be a little bit of a head case, or, you know, he might be a little bit of a problem for an organization. So that would have been a little more worrisome. But with Fizdale, I mean, I'm not too worried about it. Most players, you know, 95% of the players that played for Fizdale loved him. Just probably the most important player outside of LeBron and Bosh, and LeBron, Wade, and Bosh that played for Fizdale, didn't like him. And so that's it was unfortunate, and it cost him his job. But I don't think that'll be I wouldn't envision that being an issue.
Hey guys, if you enjoyed this podcast segment, be sure to check out all of our shows on the New Generation Podcast Network on SoundCloud, iTunes, and Stitcher.